Current iteration. This chart gives a general overview of your project and current sprint. By default, we set a sprint to 2 weeks, but you can change that in settings. Tab number 1. High Impacts. The High Impacts chart is the most important tab here, because it indicates high-impact violations. High-impact violations are the critical violations that you need to fix straight away. I usually open one more tab with violations and check who is responsible for these violations, and when they were created. I usually look for more details and share those details with the responsible developer. Tab number 2. Total lock. Here you can find the total lines of code that have been added during the current sprint. You can see how many lines have been added during this sprint, the previous sprint, and the previous iterations. Tab number 3. Commits. Here you can find information on when your commits were added, how often developers commit code, and of course, you have a possibility to compare this information with the previous sprint and average numbers. Tab number 4. Rating. This is the overall code rating of the current sprint based on violations that developers have made. If your rating is B and lower, we recommend checking your code and all the violations. Code quality. Chart number 1. Daily code rating. On this important chart, we can pick a time or spot to see the current state of affairs for every commit and developer. Code is split by a committer and sorted by the number of lines of code added. The rating shows a relative risk that the developer's code may carry. It's important not to judge right away, but supply a code reviewer with this data to know where to start. We suppose that code marked with E+ has more chances to have issues than code marked with B+. With this chart, my suggestion is the same. Find developer or commit with doubtful code quality, find his or her violations, and discuss it. It's important to add that code quality rating allows the comparison of different technologies and is based on the density and severity, severity, of issues found by a static code analyzer. Next charts. Code metrics by developer and repository. Here you can find a unique fingerprint for every developer and repository. We have tiny tooltips that explain the meaning of these metrics. Chart number 4 and number 5. High-impact violations by commit and developer. The amount of high-impact code issues existing in the code split by each commit or developer. It's important to fix high-impact violations first and not to have them in the code base, as they're code issues with the highest risk to operational stability and security of your code base. Activity tab. Code output timeline. Here you can track added and remove lines of code during a given period of time. Next chart. Fat commits. Fat commits are the commits with 8 times bigger number of code lines than the number of lines in an average commit. Fat commits signal one of the following. It's a third-party scan code that changes the metrics. It's a legacy code that distorts the metrics. Some developers prefer to commit big portions of code, which isn't the best practice. Comments size. Quality of comments for commits is important to understand what work was delivered with each commit, especially when the code is transferred from one developer to another. We believe that comments should be precise, and you can't write precise comments with 5 symbols. Usually, the longer comment the better. Percentage of tickets mentioned in the comment to each commit comparing to all amount of commits. 75% to 100% is the target value, the less it is, the worse. We believe that developers should mention ticket in each commit, so you can always go back and find out to what ticket this comment is connected. The last chart. Code affected by developer. Amount of code added, deleted, and affected, touched by each developer. It's an important chart to identify developers with a strong influence on the code base. Developers with a high amount of affected lines of code are those who know the code base better and are first to contact if something goes wrong. There could be many source code violations identified in a repository. They all can be found on the Rules tab for review and technical discussion. If you agree with your developers that some rules don't apply, they can be easily turned off right there. If you push on the specific rule, you will find extra information connected to this rule. Developers tab. On this tab, you have an overview of all the developers and their main metrics such as technical debt per line of code, violations per 1,000 lines of code, complexity, duplicates, high impacts, critical issues that have to be solved, lines of code, commits, and so on. You can compare different developers in the table view or on the chart. Commits tab. On this tab, you can check every single commit with the same metrics and have the same bird's-eye view of commits when your teammates usually do commits. Violations tab. In my humble opinion, this is the most important tab. This is where you can find the causes of all the code problems. You can sort violations by risk. Critical violations are the most important. We give you an estimate of how much time your developer needs to fix this issue. You can find the owner of the violation and the commit. If you push on the violation, you will find extra information connected to this issue.